Tonight on the Late Debate, how much did the budget really cost Labour? The party could be punished at next year's local elections after damaging claims voters were misled. And there are questions about the Prime Minister's future. Also tonight, worried businesses feeling ignored as leafy corner of North London is eyed up for thousands of new homes.
This has been here many, many years. Why destroy it? Why build in Cruise Hill when they can build on other plots they've got elsewhere?
And as patients are treated in corridors, why another doctor's strike is the last thing the Health Secretary needs. Hello and welcome to the Late Debate. The ultimate verdict on the government's budget is perhaps yet to come. Next year, the polls will open in the local elections in a real test of Labour's popularity. The party controls most councils in London. But will bigger tax bills and talk of voters being misled over the country's finances change that? And will the Prime Minister hang on to his job?
Can the right honourable gentleman tell the House why are his own MPs describing him as a caretaker Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, my own MPs are very proud. We've just passed a budget which protected our public services and our NHS. No austerity which brought our NHS to the ground. We've created the conditions for economic stability with the headroom we need. And Mr. Speaker, we're concentrating on the single most important issue for families up and down the country, which is the cost of living, by taking £150 off their energy bills.
Joining me now to discuss that are my guests this week. From Labour, the MP for Croydon East, Natasha Irons. For the Conservatives, the MP for Romford, Andrew Rossendale. And from the Liberal Democrats, the MP for Epsom and Ewell, Helen Maguire. Welcome, all of you. Natasha, one recent opinion poll says 9 out of 10 voters don't think the Chancellor is doing a good job. You're presumably not one of them?
No, I'm not. No, I think she's doing a great job.
And what do you think her legacy of the budget will be?
Well, look, the Chancellor was very clear that this budget was about cutting debt, cutting NHS waiting times and cutting the cost of living. Bringing down national debt will be good for us all because the legacy of that debt, that it costs us so much money as a country, our tax money should be going to servicing it. And when we're thinking about people's livelihoods and what's the cost of living, taking money off people's energy bills is an important step, but also those breakfast clubs that we're opening to help parents and taking children out of child poverty. I know that might have seemed controversial to some, but taking over 3,000 children in my constituency out of poverty, I think is an amazing legacy for the Chancellor. OK, so the budget's about balancing the books and the government's priorities. We heard them from Natasha.
Do you think, Helen Maguire, that it's enough to save Sir Keir Starmer? Will he be in his job next year?
I think what we saw a couple of weeks ago from the Chancellor really was a beige budget. It's a budget that's hitting hardworking individuals and families up and down the country. And we're not really seeing substantial growth from this. I mean, the last quarter was 0.1% of growth. And what we've been talking about, the Liberal Democrats, is having a closer customs union with the European Union, which will bring in far more substantial money to actually help grow the economy. So it's really disappointing that we didn't really see a budget, a greater vision for the country from this budget.
Andrew, Helen says it's a beige budget. It's not as bad as you might have feared.
It's a disastrous budget. It's calamitous. So we're in the biggest debt in our entire history. We've got taxes higher than ever before, certainly in our lifetimes. And each household is in debt, if you calculate it per household, by at least £100,000 a year. We can't go on spending
£100,000 a year
per household across the country. Yes,
that's the kind that in the last year,
if you calculate the debt that we're in, that's what each household owes. You can't go on spending money you don't have.
But Andrew,
so we need to live within our means.
Come on, to be fair, that debt has been amassed not under the last year, has it?
I agree with you.
And so to bring it down over long term is a...
Can I just say to you, I couldn't agree with you more. I think both governments have spent money that we haven't actually had to spend. So we're handing over this huge debt to the next generation.
Well, this government is attempting to bring that down over the course of this Parliament for the benefit of our young people.
It's not going to work. See, spending money we don't have, raising taxes shrinks the economy and that makes the country poorer and less productive.
And I think
that's the reality.
it's really hitting individuals and families up and down the country. And, you know, we could have had a windfall tax on the banks, for example, which has seen record profits in the past couple of years. There was no mention of tax on the banks at all. And quite frankly, after the budget, I think they were probably celebrating.
We could have had a return to
that was incredibly
and done
disappointing.
What both your coalition government
But
did.
Natasha, where's the money coming from for all this? The country needs to live within its means. You cannot go on spending what we don't have.
The budget made fair and necessary decisions so that we could pay for our public services. As you all know, the markets didn't react the way they did to the Liz Truss budget. As somebody who had to remortgage just as that happened, I know that the PTSD that we all have as a nation didn't come out of this budget.
We're far worse economic position than we were under Liz Truss. But I'll tell you what won't work is going back under the control of the European Union by joining the customs union. That's what we want to get out of.
Well, no, absolutely.
So
because
we
I
could
think
trade globally without control from Brussels.
Well, I think what happened was obviously everyone was promised, £350 million per week. That hasn't happened. What we're seeing at the moment is that it's costing us £250 million a day. That's absolutely disastrous. I've got businesses in my constituency who are really fed up with the red tape. They're importing and exporting. They're really frustrated with that, and they can't do the business that they want. So businesses are calling for closer ties with the European Union.
And also the Natasha, going back to that other aim of the budget, apart from balancing the books, it's securing the Prime Minister's future. How does he stop the plotting?
I don't think the aim of the budget was to secure the Prime Minister's future, is to balance the economy and look after the country. I think the Prime Minister is secure in his position. I speak to colleagues, and we all understand the challenges that the Prime Minister is working through. And, he is that somebody who's got integrity and is trying to stabilise this country, and I've got complete faith in him.
One aspect of the budget was a freeze on national rail fares. Your constituents, Helen, must have been pleased about that.
Yeah, they were absolutely delighted with that. But unfortunately, I had a constituent just the other day who's come to me and said that actually, because of the standardisation of the rail fares, their actual rail fares going up. So we need to actually understand exactly what's happening. We've got the rail bills going through at the moment, but obviously it's not what it seems at the moment. And on top of that, we're now hearing that TfL prices are going to increase. So many of my constituents commute into London every single day, as I do, to do work. And instead of actually their train prices being frozen, it's actually going to go up. So it's really disappointing for them. They're being hit every single day. They're feeling the cost of living crisis, and now their train prices are going up as well.
Andrew, the Mayor confirmed today that prices on TfL will go up by 5.8% because of a deal he did to secure £2.2 billion of funding for TfL. That's quite a good deal, isn't it?
So we're not getting a fare freeze in the Greater London area on TfL. That's clear. So the fact is that any government can promise to freeze fares or freeze costs for anything to be popular. The reality is that if you do that, yes, it might make you a bit more popular. People think this is great, but the reality is who's paying for it again? So ultimately, we have to balance the books. What the government's doing is it's throwing out gimmicks, but it's not actually putting forward a long-term plan to put our economy in a stable place. That is what we need, and it does mean reducing public expenditure. We cannot go on spending money we simply don't have.
So I think
gimmicks.
I don't think it's a gimmick to freeze rail fares for the first time in 30 years. And I think when it comes to TfL, look, the Mayor is having to take fair and necessary steps there, and he's capping it for it actually only affects tube and overground transport. It doesn't affect bus and tram transport, which impacts my constituency. Those fares will be frozen, and they tend to impact the lowest people on the lowest.
Freeze fares. How do you invest in the public transport system if you're freezing fares?
They tend to impact the people on the lowest income. But if the Mayor is also having them to pass on the cost in other areas in the transport system, that's how we continue to pay for TfL and make sure that we have the transport system we need. But we do need to make sure it's fair and balanced, that people on the lowest incomes can still get around, get to the jobs that they need to get to. And as I said, in my constituency, frozen bus fares and tram fares is a win for us.
Well, it's always a win to have lower fares and lower prices for anything, but you have to be responsible about how you manage the nation's finances. And that's what this government is simply not doing. They are spending money, taxing people to the hilt, and it's not sustainable long term. That's
and I
the
think
truth
also
of it.
if prices are going up at TfL, whatever, whether it's the trains, and as I said, some of my constituents are seeing increased rail fare, and they actually want a really good service. And what we're seeing in my constituency is, unfortunately, train frequency has halved post-COVID, and so they're getting on absolutely jam-packed trains. They're being delayed. They're not getting the service they're paying for.
That's the reason to renationalise the rail and take that back into public ownership and to give us the consistency and service that we need.
OK, let's just move on from that aspect of the budget, because one other bit in the budget, Labour reminded us of its plan to deliver lots of new homes, including on Greenbelt land. But it was a reminder businesses near Enfield didn't need. Some have been trading in Cruise Hill for decades and are worried about being bulldozed to make way for one of the government's promised new towns.
I just can't see why they want to get rid of Greenbelt area to make it into a concrete jungle. The roads into Cruise Hill are only single carriageways. They can't take the volume of traffic at weekends anyway, with the people coming into Cruise Hill to the garden centres.
There's no question that the policies for the green belt, or building on parts of green land, will be used by almost all Labour's opponents everywhere. They'll all be against it, and that will, I think, mean that the policy to build, build, build may also mean losing votes, votes, votes.
Helen, plenty of green belt in Surrey. Are you excited about the prospect of lots of new homes?
Well, look, it's really important that there is new house building. And one of the things that we've been calling for is 150,000 new social homes every single year. And it's disappointing that we haven't got such a target with this Labour government. But what's really important is that we really focus on the brownfield first policy. There are many developers who are holding on to land and they're not building on it. It's really important that we get those planning permissions through so they can actually build. In fact, in the country, there's 500,000 locations where homes could be built and they're not being built, so it's really important that we do that, and that's why our policy is to make sure that you either use it or you lose it. So let's make sure that these developers are building homes in the right places.
Natasha, we heard from people in Cruise Hill who are concerned that they're not being listened to. How do you avoid giving the impression that relaxing the planning rules is not a case of Labour riding roughshod over voters?
Well, I have to say I'm close to the community that you featured in your video. But what I would say is that we've got 1 in 21 of every child in London is homeless and in temporary accommodation. We've got a housing crisis in this city that is not just holding us back economically, but hindering us socially. So we have to do something. The thing of brownfield first is absolutely still the policy, but we have to also be honest with people and realistic about that not delivering the 88,000 homes that we need every year in London to ensure that everybody can have a safe and affordable home roof over their head. So when we're talking about Greenbelt, what we're talking about is land that isn't what we would actually identify as green belts. So we're not talking about parks. You featured something there where there was already a building on that site. We're talking about places that have already got buildings on them that are inaccessible. They're not your traditional green belt that you would think of when you think about that.
But I think the challenge with that, and something that we've certainly had in my constituency, is where there have been houses built on green belt, is that my constituents are saying to me the houses get built and then there aren't the schools, there aren't the GP surgeries, because the infrastructure follows years later, and that's not correct. And also, so for example, if I can just finish a moment, also, the water companies aren't statutory consultees in the planning process. So actually that comes later as well. And that's one of the things that they're saying to me is actually they want to be part of this. So if this happens, then the right infrastructure is there. But that's not happening at the moment.
Why we need to change. That's why we've put through changes in the planning and infrastructure bill to do exactly that. We cannot just build just properties. We do have to build the infrastructure. And with the mayor's policy on this comes with increasing biodiversity, ensuring that we have the infrastructure that we need, because it is about building communities and neighbourhoods and not just blocks.
Yeah, but water companies still aren't statutory consultees.
So you're not going to win that argument in my borough, Natasha, I'm afraid. So we are sadly under Greater London, and luckily Helen doesn't have the Mayor of London to impose planning on your borough, even though you're right next to Greater London. We do. So we've got this green belt, and we are at risk, just as we've seen in Enfield. The fact is, planning decisions should be local. They should be made democratically by elected councillors in local authorities, like mine in Havering, which is lumped into Greater London, even though, as you know, Simon, we are very much part of Essex. But we have no say, because the Mayor of London is a dictator. I mean, he says what he wants to do. He doesn't show any interest in boroughs like mine. We pay a huge amount of precept in, and yet we get policies imposed on us, planning, ULEZ and such like, costing our borough a lot of money. People are not happy with that. And frankly, we want control of our own planning policies. And if we could have a referendum, we'd much rather be part of Greater Essex
Natasha,
and Greater London.
The Mayor's a dictator.
That's ridiculous. I would just like to sort of kind of say to Andrew, you and I, we're all MPs here. You will have people that come to your surgeries with tales of being rehoused in cities and towns far, far away from London. They will have to leave their jobs. Their kids will have to leave their classrooms. And we cannot live in that. I'm sure those people want to stay in Havering, want to stay near their networks. If you're not building the homes for them to stay
But it's
there,
a local decision, surely. If you elect local councillors, it's the
how-
local
how
authority
on
that should
earth-
decide.
But
Why
are
should
you
it
happy for those
calm?
people to be relocated
I
miles
am
away from their
happy
jobs and their schools?
for
and
my
to do
borough
that?
to be autonomous over what we do in our own borough.
Even if it
I am
means
not
a lot of your
happy
children are homeless. Is
for a
that
mayor of
okay?
London, which has no democratic mandate in our borough, to start
Apart from
telling us
winning
what
the
to
Can
do,
I ask all
except not
three of
winning
you,
any votes.
is the
Sorry.
government's target of 1.5 million new homes realistic?
I think one of the things that isn't realistic about that, I mean, we might all like to see that, but the problem, we have a massive problem in our construction industry at the moment. I mean, I had a roundtable with businesses locally, and they said we just don't have the skilled workers to deliver that.
And
also
your answer, I can see where we're going with this.
Absolutely, if
It's
we have
more migrant workers.
Well, we need a bespoke customs union, as I said, so we need that. But also, yes, the construction industry has a huge amount of people that come in from other countries. So if we can't train them ourselves, and obviously we want more skilled workers, we want the apprenticeships, and I know that's the line that we're going down, but they're absolutely crying out for more workers at the moment. They don't have them. So I'm afraid the industry isn't there to actually support the building that's required.
I think it's a fair challenge to say that the cost of building has escalated dramatically since we left the EU. That pressure on developers cannot be ignored. But we do need to ensure that we have the workforce that are trained and skilled. But if we have, as we're working towards closer relationships with the EU, to ensure that we can benefit our economy, but also leverage that talent and skills to train up our own workforce.
Briefly, Andrew, will, as Tony Travers suggested there, Labour's policies on building on the Greenbelt help the Conservatives to win back out of London councils?
So I think that Conservatives will do better in some parts of Greater London, but of course Reform are also going to take a lot of votes from both Labour and Conservative and from other parties, because I think people are generally disillusioned with politics at the moment. And certainly in Greater London and my part of Greater London, there's huge disillusionment because it feels like we have a mayor of London that has no interest in our borough and is taking huge sums of money away from our borough, but dictating
Okay, I think
rules.
you've made that point
we don't
a
want
couple
that
of times.
anymore. We want a
Let's
change.
move on to something that's affecting all three of your constituencies, and that's the health service, because hospitals are under real pressure from a big spike in flu cases. Video given to ITV News also shows patients being treated in A&E corridors at Queen's Hospital in Romford. But there could be a glimmer of good news as doctors consider whether a new offer is enough to call off next week's strike. Andrew, that...
I think this is a good deal. I think doctors should vote for it. It would enable us to end these strikes before Christmas, draw a line under the dispute this year and start the new year with a fresh start. So I urge doctors to vote for this deal.
Andrew, that hospital in Romford's in your constituency, the next door constituency to the Health Secretary. Is it the fault of management? What happened there?
So I've raised this with ministers. I've raised it with the Health Secretary, whose constituents use the Queen's Hospital in Romford. The A&E is simply not able to deal with the amount of people coming in needing a care. It's twice as many patients coming in as it was meant to cater for when it was built. So the government does need to do something about this at Queen's Hospital. It covers a vast area of the east side of Greater London and parts of Essex. So we need a stronger A&E that can actually manage the number of patients coming in. But in terms of the junior doctors, I think it's appalling. I mean, they've already been given a huge pay increase. Now they want another huge pay increase. Frankly, if you work for the public sector, you're paid by the taxpayer, you should work. And if people's lives could be at risk over the Christmas period, the suggestion that they would go on strike and actually risk people's lives, I think, is shameful. They should carry on working and look after the people they're paid to look after.
Is Wes Streeting a good negotiator?
I think the Health Secretary's done everything he possibly can to avoid this situation. I mean, my understanding that this is about two things. So it's about pay, but also the training places and job prospects of doctors in the future. As Andrew has said, they got a record, almost 29% pay rise that the Health Secretary managed to
Without
get
productivity agreement.
managed to get for them. But the second part of it, the second legitimate part of their grievance is that training places are often there's often a training bottleneck for them. And the Health Secretary's managed to fight for 4,000 extra training places. He's also ready to come forward with urgent legislation to ensure that British trained doctors are prioritised for those placements. So he's really listened and tried to address their concerns. And I just really hope that the BMA take a step back here and you know, as the Health Secretary said, let's go forward with some hope and optimism.
Is there a danger that because you've given big pay rises to doctors in the past and to train drivers, that the unions will see you as a government that's going to roll over?
I don't think anyone can make that connection. I think listening to people's legitimate concerns and supporting them to have rights at work is a completely decent thing to do. I think in this case, however, the ask is just not feasible and is not fair, really. That, you know, the Health Secretary has done everything in his power to avoid this situation.
Helen, even without the doctors' strike, hospitals in constituencies like yours are under pressure.
Absolutely. I mean, and not only that, but we have St Helier, which is quite frankly absolutely falling apart. I mean, it's got windows that are taped together, it's got ceilings that are falling in, and buildings that simply can't be used. You know, and we called on the government to obviously fund a new hospital there, and now it's been kicked down the road 10 years before we see a new hospital. The A&E waiting times have gone up. Every area of the hospital in Epsom has gone up as well. So we're seeing huge pressures. So I understand the pressures that the resident doctors are under, and I understand their concerns, and obviously they work incredibly hard for the NHS, but a 29% increase at the moment really is unjust. But there are lots of different areas that we have to look at in the NHS, obviously supporting the GPs, because we need to make sure there are less people that are actually going to A&E in the first place, so we can try and reduce that pressure, and also looking at social care. We have 1,000 people currently in Surrey, Sussex and Kent who are waiting to be discharged from the hospital. That's costing the NHS a huge amount of money, and we need to sort that out.
So I think, so just to say on that, that's, you know, again, it's the kind of the unfortunate thing here is you have a Health Secretary who is, you know, planning for the long term for the NHS. The 10-year plan is all about that, taking care not in hospital where it's expensive, but in the community where you nip things in the bud, you increase those GP appointments and put investment into those areas.
Yeah, but unfortunately, GPs at the moment are seeing more patients than they've ever seen before. And also, if we look at social care, they've kicked the can down the road and they're doing another project actually looking at it. So we're not seeing an actual deliverable plan.
But no productivity agreement, and the inefficiencies in the health service are vast.
Yeah.
Now, if we're going to spend more and more money on the health service, we have a duty to make sure the money is properly spent and isn't wasted on bureaucracy and over-management.
I completely agree with you, and I think
that isn't happening.
But the Health Secretary, it's part of that 10-year health plan is all about trying to make the NHS more efficient. He has been crystal clear when he says it's not just about putting more money in, it is making sure that every penny is spent correctly. And that's why you're looking at things like making the NHS digital and fit for the future.
So where was the productivity agreement with the doctors? He gave them a huge pay rise without any guarantee of more productivity. Why didn't that happen?
He negotiated with the doctors in good faith. He negotiated with the doctors in good faith. We've come to a point where...
Natasha and Andrew, you're not going to agree, and I'm afraid we've run out of time because that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you to my guests, Natasha Irons, Andrew Rossendale and Helen Maguire. We're back in the new year. Till then, have a very good Christmas. Goodbye, and thank you for watching. Thank you.